When we think of muscle growth, we often picture heavy weights, long workouts, and extreme discipline. And while those things do play a role, they are just tools. The real driver of muscle growth, the biological trigger, is actually stress. But not just any stress. Specific, controlled, intermittent stress that tells the body, adapt or break. And in that moment, when the body chooses to adapt, it lays down new tissue, reconfigures signaling pathways, and rewires its priorities to meet the challenge next time with more strength. Let's talk about what that actually means from a biological perspective. At the cellular level, muscle is not built in the gym. It's built in response to damage. When you lift weights, you're not just pushing iron, you're creating microtears in muscle fibers. These tears are a form of controlled trauma. In response, the body initiates a cascade of repair mechanisms. Satellite cells, which are a type of stem cell located on the outer surface of muscle fibers, get activated. They fuse to the damaged fibers, donate their nuclei, and help rebuild the muscle thicker and stronger than before. This is not just recovery. This is adaptation through stress. But here's what's interesting. That process only occurs when the stress is just enough. Too little, and the body has no reason to adapt. Too much, and the damage exceeds the repair capacity, leading to injury, burnout, or systemic fatigue. The key then is to apply what's known as eustress, a positive form of stress that stimulates growth without overwhelming the system. Think of it like a thermostat. You want to turn up the heat just enough to trigger a response, but not so much that you burn the house down. This idea isn't new. It's rooted in a biological principle called hormesis. Hormesis is the concept that small doses of stress improve an organism's function. It's the reason that lifting a moderate weight for several reps is beneficial, but trying to lift a truck in one go would be catastrophic. It's also why cold showers and intermittent fasting and high-intensity interval training all yield health benefits. They are hormetic stressors, short-term challenges that upregulate the body's repair and resilience mechanisms. In muscle, hormesis translates directly into growth, strength, and endurance. Now, let's get specific. What actually happens when we lift weights and create that muscular stress? First, there's mechanical tension. This is the physical pulling and contracting of the muscle under load. It's sensed by mechanoreceptors, which trigger intracellular signaling pathways. One of the key pathways is the mTOR pathway, mechanistic target of rapamycin. mTOR is like a molecular foreman on a construction site. It tells the cell to start building, synthesizing proteins, and growing. But mTOR doesn't get activated unless the stress threshold is crossed. That threshold is different for every person, based on training history, genetics, and even sleep and nutrition. That's why two people can do the same workout and get very different results. Second, there's muscle damage, which we talked about earlier. It sounds bad, but it's essential. Controlled damage recruits the immune system to the site. Macrophages, neutrophils, and other inflammatory cells rush in, not to cause harm, but to clean up debris and signal for regeneration. Inflammation, when properly regulated, is a growth-promoting force. It's not the enemy, it's the beginning of the healing process. In fact, suppressing inflammation too aggressively, such as by taking NSAIDs like ibuprofen right after training, can blunt muscle growth by interrupting this signaling cascade. Third, there's metabolic stress, that burning sensation you feel during high rep sets or intense intervals. That's a buildup of metabolites like lactate, hydrogen ions, and reactive oxygen species. These molecules are often seen as waste, but they serve a signaling role too. They indicate that the muscle is being challenged, and they trigger adaptations in mitochondrial function, capillary density, and anaerobic capacity. In essence, the muscle learns to become more efficient and powerful in response to repeated exposure to this metabolic stress. But none of this happens in isolation. The nervous system plays a central role. Every contraction begins with a signal from the brain. The motor cortex initiates the movement, and motor neurons fire down the spinal cord, activating muscle fibers in specific patterns. When we lift heavy weights, especially compound movements like squats or deadlifts, we recruit more motor units, bundles of muscle fibers innervated by a single nerve. Over time, with training, the nervous system becomes more efficient. It learns to fire faster, synchronize better, and recruit higher threshold motor units. This neural adaptation is one of the fastest responses to training stress. It can occur within a few days, and it sets the foundation for future hypertrophy. Let's also talk about hormones. Stress, when appropriately dosed, triggers a surge in anabolic hormones like testosterone, growth hormone, and IGF-1. These hormones amplify protein synthesis, cell growth, and recovery. Cortisol, often seen as the villain, is also part of the puzzle. Acute spikes in cortisol are not only natural, they're necessary. Cortisol helps mobilize energy, reduce pain, and regulate inflammation in the short term. It becomes problematic only when it stays elevated chronically, which is typically due to life stressors, poor sleep, or overtraining. This is another reason why balance matters. Stress is a tool. It can sharpen or shatter depending on how you wield it. One of the most underappreciated elements in this process is rest. Without sufficient sleep and recovery, the adaptive response simply doesn't happen. During deep sleep, particularly stages 3 and 4 of non-REM sleep, the body releases the majority of its growth hormone. This is when tissue repair is maximized, inflammation is resolved, and memories, including motor patterns, are consolidated. If you're lifting but not sleeping, you're creating stress without resolution. That's like opening tabs on a computer and never closing them. Eventually, the system crashes. Nutrition also influences how the body perceives and responds to stress. Protein, particularly essential amino acids like leucine, is critical for muscle protein synthesis. Carbohydrates help replenish glycogen and blunt excessive cortisol after training. Micronutrients, magnesium, zinc, vitamin D, all support the enzymatic processes involved in repair. In a nutrient-deprived state, even well-structured training becomes catabolic. The stress exceeds the body's ability to cope, and instead of growing, you regress. Timing matters too. There's growing evidence that training early in the day, when cortisol is naturally high, aligns with the body's circadian rhythm and may enhance performance and recovery. On the other hand, training in the evening can improve strength in some people due to increased body temperature and joint mobility. What's important is consistency, sending the same signal at roughly the same time so the body learns what to expect. Predictable stress becomes manageable stress, and manageable stress is what drives sustainable growth. Now, let's address something deeper: mindset. The way you perceive stress dramatically affects how your body responds to it. Research in psychoneuroimmunology has shown that people who view stress as enhancing rather than damaging actually produce more DHEI, a hormone that counterbalances cortisol and promotes resilience. This is not just a psychological trick, it's a measurable physiological shift. When you approach a challenging workout with a mindset of opportunity rather than fear, you tip the hormonal scale toward adaptation. Stress becomes not a threat, but a signal to evolve. This brings us to a concept that transcends physiology: resilience. Resilience is built in the gym, but it's expressed in life. The same hormetic principles that cause your muscles to grow also make your mind more robust. Learning to lean into discomfort, to embrace effort, to see failure as feedback, these are the mental equivalents of progressive overload. You become stronger not just in muscle, but in will. You develop what researchers call stress inoculation. With each exposure to controlled challenge, you expand your capacity. You widen the bandwidth of what you can handle. And that, more than anything, is the essence of training. But remember, this only works when stress is cycled. You can't be in a perpetual state of strain. The growth happens in waves: stress, recover, repeat. This is why deload weeks, active recovery, and periodization are not optional. They're essential. The nervous system needs breaks. The joints need unloading. The mind needs renewal. Without that oscillation, the stress turns chronic. And chronic stress is degenerative, not adaptive. One of the most powerful things you can do to enhance muscle growth is to learn how to regulate your own nervous system. This means understanding how to downshift from sympathetic arousal, fight or flight, into parasympathetic recovery, rest and digest. Breathwork, meditation, even a simple walk outdoors can accelerate recovery by shifting the autonomic balance. When the nervous system feels safe, it allows resources to be directed toward repair, not survival. So ironically, one of the best things you can do for your muscle gains might be learning how to relax deeply and intentionally. Let's not forget the long-term view. Muscle growth is slow, even with optimal training, nutrition, and sleep. You might gain 1 to 2 pounds of lean mass per month. That's it. There are no shortcuts. But over a year, that adds up. Over a decade, it transforms your body and your physiology, and the benefits go far beyond aesthetics. Muscle is a metabolic organ. It improves glucose regulation, supports immune function, and acts as a reservoir of amino acids during illness. In aging populations, muscle mass is the strongest predictor of longevity and independence. Building muscle is not just about looking good, it's about living better and longer. And so we return to stress not as something to avoid, but as something to understand. Not all stress is bad. When delivered in the right dose, at the right time, with the right recovery, stress is the most powerful force for growth that biology has to offer. Your body was designed to adapt. Your brain was built to overcome. The systems are already in place. The question is, will you apply the right signal? Will you challenge yourself, not recklessly, but deliberately? Will you learn to embrace the burn, the fatigue, the strain as signs not of weakness, but of transformation? Because in the end, muscle doesn't grow in comfort. It grows in response to challenge. And just like life, the growth is always on the other side of the stress. The concept that stress is not just a burden, but a biological lever for transformation leads us deeper into a discussion of progressive overload, the systematic increase of physical stress over time. Progressive overload is the cornerstone of all effective resistance training protocols, but its principle is deeply neurobiological. When a muscle is repeatedly exposed to the same level of stress, the stimulus becomes insufficient. The body, being efficient, adapts just enough to handle the familiar load, then stops. That's why you don't continue to grow if you never increase your weights, reps, or intensity. The brain registers repeated stimuli, evaluates their threat level, and only triggers adaptation when it deems the challenge significant. Therefore, to grow, you must consistently increase the challenge in a measured and intentional way. The stress must evolve with you. This doesn't always mean heavier weights. It could mean slower tempo, shorter rest periods, more controlled eccentric movement, or greater exercise complexity. Each of these variations introduces a new kind of stress, mechanical, metabolic, or neurological, that forces the body to reassess and respond. Stress must not only be applied, it must be varied. The neuromuscular system thrives on novelty. That novelty must be difficult enough to be noticed by your central nervous system, but not so disruptive that it sends your body into disarray. This again reflects the Goldilocks principle: not too little, not too much. Just enough challenge to spark plasticity. Plasticity isn't just something that happens in the brain. Muscle has its own version, muscle plasticity. The muscle fibers themselves can shift types. Type I fibers, which are slow twitch and endurance-oriented, can become more oxidative. Type I fibers, the fast twitch, high force fibers, can grow in size and improve in firing rate. But here's the key: these adaptations are stress specific. Endurance-based stress produces one kind of adaptation. High-intensity, short-duration stress produces another. This means the type of stress you choose dictates not just if you adapt, but how. And this is why specificity matters so much. If you want size, you train with volume. If you want power, you train with explosiveness. If you want endurance, you stress time under tension. Each goal has a stress signature, and knowing which one to target gives you precision in your training. Let's go even further into the neurology. Every time you train, you're not just working your muscles. You're training the brain to map those muscles with more detail. This is known as proprioception, your body's sense of its own position and movement. The more you train with intentionality, the more accurate this map becomes. Neural circuits become more refined. Cortical representation of the trained body parts becomes denser. This leads to better control, more efficient contractions, and reduced injury risk. It also enhances the ability to generate force. Strength is not just a muscular adaptation, it's a neurological skill. This is also why mind-muscle connection matters. When you focus intensely on the working muscle, you activate more motor units. You bring more of the nervous system online. Studies using electromyography, EMG, have shown that conscious attention to a specific muscle group during exercise increases its activation. This is especially important for muscles that are often under-recruited or dormant due to sedentary habits, like the glutes, lower traps, or deep core stabilizers. With focused training, you can bring these muscles back online, rewire the movement pattern, and build strength through renewed neural drive. Again, stress guides adaptation, but conscious stress that you are mentally engaged with, has a multiplier effect. Another dimension of stress that is often overlooked is joint and connective tissue adaptation. Muscles adapt relatively quickly, but tendons and ligaments take longer. These tissues are primarily made of collagen, and their remodeling process requires consistent mechanical load over months, not weeks. This is why gradual progression is critical. Sudden increases in intensity can overload these structures, leading to injury. But with consistent stress, collagen fibers align along the lines of force, vascularity increases, and tissue resilience improves. This is long-term robustness. The stress you apply today to the connective tissue sets the foundation for the durability of your future performance. This also speaks to the value of eccentric loading. Eccentric contractions, when the muscle lengthens under tension, create more mechanical damage than concentric ones. This damage isn't destructive. It's instructive. It tells the body that the tissue needs to be reinforced. Eccentric training has been shown to stimulate greater hypertrophy, tendon remodeling, and joint stability than concentric training alone. It's one of the most potent forms of stress you can apply and one of the most underutilized. Lowering a weight slowly, resisting gravity, is a neurological and muscular challenge that rewires the brain to generate control, not just power. We also have to examine recovery stress, the idea that stress doesn't end with the last rep. Your body remains in a state of alert for hours post-training. This is called the afterburn, effect or excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, EPOC. During this phase, metabolism is elevated, inflammation is resolving, and muscle protein synthesis is active. But the quality of this phase depends on your environment. If you finish your workout and immediately enter a high-stress setting, work, traffic, emotional chaos, you interfere with the parasympathetic recovery phase. The body stays in defense mode and delays the healing process. This is why post-workout rituals matter. Cooling down, breathing deeply, hydrating, consuming adequate nutrients. All these steps help transition your body from fight to rebuild. Sleep is where this rebuilding peaks. Deep sleep is anabolic. That's when testosterone pulses, growth hormone peaks, and the glymphatic system clears metabolic waste from the brain. Lack of sleep is not just a lifestyle issue, it's a stressor. It blunts insulin sensitivity, raises cortisol, reduces testosterone, and impairs motor learning. It compromises the entire stress adaptation cycle. And ironically, people who overtrain are often the worst sleepers. They push hard, but never let go. This leads to a mismatch between stress and repair, a dangerous place where progress stalls and injury risk climbs. Learning to sleep well is not optional. It's a non-negotiable requirement for growth. Let's bring in another powerful tool, breathing. Breath is the fastest way to regulate stress. When you exhale longer than you inhale, you stimulate the vagus nerve, downshift into parasympathetic dominance, and slow your heart rate. This has immediate benefits post-training, but also accumulates over time. People who practice breath control regularly have lower resting heart rates, better blood pressure regulation, and improved emotional resilience. This matters in the context of training because emotional stress affects physical recovery. Cortisol doesn't distinguish between psychological and physical stressors. So if your life is chaotic, your training stress piles onto that existing load. Eventually, something breaks. Learning to modulate your breathing gives you the ability to create recovery moments throughout the day, not just at night. Cold exposure is another tool worth mentioning. Applied after workouts, it can reduce inflammation and muscle soreness, but it can also blunt hypertrophy by interfering with the inflammatory signaling needed for adaptation. So timing matters. If your goal is maximal muscle growth, avoid ice baths immediately post-training. Use them on off days or at least several hours after workouts. If your goal is general recovery and mental resilience, cold exposure can be incredibly valuable. It triggers norepinephrine release, boosts dopamine, and hardens the nervous system to discomfort. This is another example of hormesis, controlled discomfort leading to systemic benefit. Then there's mental stress, something almost everyone underestimates in relation to training. When the brain is overloaded, the body doesn't prioritize growth. Cognitive fatigue drains willpower, disrupts focus, and impairs motor coordination. It also reduces adherence to habits, sleep routines, nutrition plans, training schedules. Chronic mental stress acts like background noise, constantly draining your system's ability to respond to physical stressors. This is why mindfulness, journaling, even just unplugging from devices periodically can enhance your training results. Less noise, more clarity, better execution. Better execution, more efficient stress application. Now let's talk about the lifespan view. Muscle is anti-aging. It's one of the strongest predictors of healthy aging, fall prevention, metabolic health, and cognitive function. As we age, sarcopenia, the loss of muscle tissue, becomes one of the most silent threats to vitality. But it's not inevitable. Resistance training, applied regularly and progressively, can not only slow but reverse this decline. This makes stress not just a performance enhancer, but a longevity intervention. Training becomes not about aesthetics or competition, but about staying functional, independent, and mentally sharp for as long as possible. In younger populations, the message is equally important. Early exposure to resistant stress sets a neurological and hormonal foundation that lasts for decades. Bone density improves, insulin sensitivity stabilizes, and confidence rises. The earlier the stress is introduced appropriately and safely, the more resilient the organism becomes. This is why age-appropriate strength training is not just safe, it's essential. It teaches the body to handle life's challenges physically and mentally. It creates a kind of quiet confidence that only earned strength can provide. Another aspect to consider is how the body learns to interpret stress as a signal of growth rather than danger. This is a subtle but profound shift. In untrained individuals, stress often triggers defensive mechanisms, muscle guarding, shallow breathing, fear responses. But with repeated, intentional exposure, the brain rewires. It starts to see stress as familiar, manageable, even welcome. This is what elite performers across disciplines experience. They don't avoid pressure. They lean into it because their system has learned that challenge leads to mastery. And the same principle applies to anyone at any level. The goal isn't to eliminate stress, it's to change your relationship with it. That relationship also determines how sustainable your training is. People who view training as punishment often burn out. Those who see it as a form of self-respect or a dialogue with their body build habits that last. The mindset you bring into your training sessions literally alters the chemical makeup of your internal environment. Positive anticipation increases dopamine. Gratitude reduces cortisol. Focus enhances motor learning. This isn't mysticism, it's measurable biology. The way you think about stress determines what it becomes in your body, a poison or a prescription. So the message is clear: a little stress applied wisely, consistently, and intentionally is the biological key to muscle growth. But more than that, it's a key to transformation. It sculpts not just your physique, but your mind, your identity, and your capacity to handle whatever life throws your way. In the end, the takeaway is simple but profound. Stress, when properly dosed and skillfully applied, is not your enemy, it is your most powerful ally in growth. The same stress that breaks you down temporarily is what signals your body and brain to rebuild stronger, more capable, more resilient. Muscle doesn't grow by accident, and it doesn't grow in comfort. It responds to effort, to strain, to resistance that challenges your current capacity. This isn't just about lifting weights, it's about understanding that every controlled discomfort, every rep that burns, every set that pushes you to your limit, every session that demands focus is a message to your biology that you are demanding more from yourself. And your body, if supported by recovery, nutrition, sleep, and attention, will rise to meet that demand. When you embrace stress in this way, when you respect its power, but don't fear it, you unlock a cycle of adaptation that doesn't just build stronger muscle, it builds a stronger version of you. This process requires consistency, patience, and a mindset that sees discomfort not as something to avoid, but as something to work with. And that shift in perspective, seeing stress not as a threat, but as a tool, is the real key to transformation, both in body and in mind.